Okay. All right. So we are continuing on. Basically, this session is just a continuation of last week's, right? And so just to recap on last week's, remember, Jesus had been doing miracles, and John the Baptist had been in prison, and he started to wonder, since he'd been in prison and the kingdom had not been inaugurated yet, he wanted to know whether or not he had misidentified Jesus as the Messiah, right? So he sends two of his disciples to go to Jesus. So Jesus is in the midst of actually doing miracles. The disciples come up, and Jesus tells John, the proof of my messiahship is the works that I've been doing. And even right now, as you come and interrupt me to ask the question, I'm in the midst right now of doing these miracles and these healings, right? Casting out demons, healing the blind, that kind of stuff. So he sends those two disciples of John back to say, tell John everything that you've seen and everything that you've heard, that is the proof of my messiahship, all right? And then after they leave, then Jesus turns to the crowd and he gives I'm going to call it a prophetic rebuke, because up to this point, the crowd has accepted who he is, not necessarily as the Messiah, but they certainly have thronged to him because of the miracles, right? But he sort of gives this predictive prophecy where he says to the crowd, you are like what? What are you like? Nope. No. You're like little children.
Like little children.
So, hey, like little children, you're sitting there and you're playing in the streets, and you know, you want me to dance, and I don't dance, and so you condemn me for that. Or I'm over here singing and you want me to do a dirge, and he says, you're just like that. Like, no matter what I do, you're going to find a reason to reject me. So now this is almost predictive, because up to this point, the crowd has really been pro-Jesus. But he's actually looking at them right now and saying, look, you are like children, and sort of predicting and prophesying that, in fact, they're going to act just like little children, and they're going to find reasons to reject his messiahship. Because remember, what is at stake here in this entire passage last week and this week is whether or not Jesus is what? What's the question? No, what's the question? Is he the Messiah? That started with the question from John. So everything from there until we end tonight is all about, is Jesus the Messiah? Okay, so after he's given that predictive prophecy about the crowd and how they're going to react, right? Now he's going to continue that on. So tonight is just a continuation. It's the same discussion, and it's all about who he is. Am I the Messiah? He's already said yes, and he's already given the proof to that to John's disciples. And now he's turned to the crowd. He's going to now speak to the crowd regarding that question. Am I the Messiah? And he's going to make some declarations tonight. So this is all one unit. Does that all make sense? Everyone good so far? One unit. All right. So he's now going to, after he talks to the crowd and says, you're like little children, no matter what I do, you're not going to accept me, basically is the context here. He's now going to pronounce curses on 3 cities in the Galilee region. So he's already kind of predicted that as a whole, the Jewish people are going to reject him, but now he's going to especially condemn 3 cities for rejecting him as the Messiah. It's his messiahship that is at stake in these passages. All right. Okay, so oops. All right, so in the big scheme of things, here's where we are at. You know, we've started this last week, was the first part of the section of the controversy regarding the king. Remember, I described this as kind of like, if you're in a movie, everything's been going great so far, but all of a sudden the music starts to change. It starts to get a little bit eerie. The music starts to get a little bit gloomy. You start to see foreshadowing. Remember, like in movies, a lot of times you can kind of foreshadow that something bad's coming. This is the foreshadowing, and the something bad that's going to come is going to happen next week. So come back next week, because that's the something bad. But this week and last week, we're all about this. The temperature is changing. The movie is changing. It's going to become really dark really quick, right? And so we talked about the question of the herald last week. And this week, we're going to cover the curses on the cities of Galilee, the explanation for their unbelief, and then the invitation to belief and discipleship. Those will be the three sections that we will cover. All right, so again, Jesus has just talked to the crowd. This is a continuation of this. This is not a different event. And now it says in Matthew chapter 11, verse 20, then, after saying that they were a bunch of children, then he began to denounce the cities where most of his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? You will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that it would be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you. So this is an extreme rebuke by Jesus on these three cities. All right. So he specifically calls them out. Now, these three cities are Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum, right? There are three Jewish cities, and they're located on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. All right. Now, remember, Jesus, most of his ministry in the gospel accounts occurs in this region. We get a little bit in Jerusalem, but most of what he does centers around the Sea of Galilee and cities like Capernaum, because remember, Capernaum is his home base. Remember that? Like Peter, that's where his house is. So Jesus has made his home base in Capernaum. Remember, Capernaum was this major trade route that lots of people came back and forth. So remember, when Jesus was doing all of these different miracles, his fame spread because he was doing them mostly around Capernaum, and people would be coming from outside the land of Israel, from inside the land of Israel, and as they would come through this region, they would hear and see all the miracles that Jesus had done. So what it said here, then, Christ is going to condemn them because the majority of his miracles are done in this area, and apparently the majority of his miracles were done in these three cities, right? Now, we do have miracles in the Gospels recorded in Bethsaida and Capernaum. We don't have anything in Chorazin. There's no mention of him even going there, right? But apparently, he did many things in Chorazin. Now, you might ask, if he did so many miracles there, why didn't the Gospel writers, write about that? Well, we've talked about this kind of at length before. The four writers of the Gospels, they have a certain focus and a certain limited amount of space, and they're only going to include things that are going to contribute to the story that they're trying to tell. And John, in his Gospel, in John chapter 21, verse 25, it says that there would not be enough books in the world to record everything that Jesus said and did, right? The world couldn't contain it. So these four Gospel accounts are recording things that contribute to their theme. Now, it's possible that the reason why Chorazin isn't mentioned is because, what they're trying to establish is the messiahship of Jesus. And they've already established that by recording things that happened in Bethsaida and Capernaum and other places. So there's no need to sort of keep on stacking on and say, oh, well, a lot of stuff happened in Chorazin, and, give every single town where these things might have occurred. But we do know that Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum, he did thousands of miracles. This is the multitudes came to them, and from morning till night, and he was constantly healing and doing miracles. So the thousands of miracles he must have done in these cities is extraordinary, right? The amount of light that these three cities had would have been immense, right? Now, what he does here is he is going to heighten his curse. It's not just that these three cities had all these miracles done in them and that they are going to be the major center, or they are going to be a center of rejection, even though they shouldn't be. They should have seen his miracles. And as he told John, tell John, I'm the Messiah because of the miracles. They should have seen the miracles and come to the same conclusion that he's in fact the Messiah. But he heightens the curse by contrasting it with three wicked cities. And these are three wicked cities. These three cities are emblematic, or they're symbols of wickedness. Like even today, even people that aren't Christians. Like when the world talks about wickedness and depravity, what names do they usually throw out there as comparison?
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, it's even common for non-Christians to look at these cities, and they are symbols of incredible depravity, incredible sin, a complete disregard for God, right? So what Jesus is going to say is, hey, look, if you take the three kind of big examples of absolute wickedness and absolute disregard for who God is, and then you compare these three cities, these three Jewish cities where I've been doing ministry and I've done all these thousands of miracles, these cities actually fare better than the three Jewish cities. In other words, you're worse than they are. And that's saying a lot. Like when you have been named as being worse than the worst, that's a pretty big curse. Worse and worse than curse. Hey, I didn't practice that, but that's actually good, right? All right, so what you have here is you have these three then wicked cities, Tyre and Sidon. Those are Phoenician cities. They're the Gentile cities on the sort of kind of northwest coast, known for their wealth and opulence at times, called out in the by the prophets for condemnation. Their wickedness was well known, and then of course Sodom, well known as well for what occurred there with Abraham and with Lot. All right. So these are the three cities, and Jesus says, woe to you, right? And of course, the reason for the curse is that he's done all of these miracles. There's no reason why these three cities shouldn't accept him as the Messiah, right? From everything that he's done. And yet he goes on to say that you have been given not just light, but you've been given great light. In other words, you've been given more light than anybody else because of all the things I've done in your very presence. And to those who great light and great revelation has been given, great things are expected. So the more you know, this is actually a principle. I don't have this up there. The principle is this: the more you know, the more you're going to be held responsible for, right? Believers or not. So as a non-believer, even Paul says that their conscience in Romans chapter 1, that the unbelievers, their conscience excuses them or accuses them. Like what's going to happen at the great white throne judgment is that God is going to open up the books of the acts and deeds of the people, and you're going to be judged by the things that you have done, right? So what we have here then is him saying, look, you were given great light, and therefore you have a great responsibility to respond in the positive. Tyre, Sidon, and Sodom were given a very low level of light, right? This is before even the Mosaic law and everything else. They knew enough to act appropriately and right. They got a lower level of light. Their punishment then is going to be less when they are thrown into hell, right? So we're going to get to that here in just a moment, okay? All right. So this is really, like I said, an extreme condemnation by Christ to call them out, and basically saying there's absolutely no excuse for what is about to occur. And what is about to occur is going to happen in our next session. So you'll see what happens there. All right. Now, what are we to make of this? Because we have previously heard Jesus reference hell twice, right? In Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount. He now is referencing it again when he talks about that they're going to be, it's the day of judgment, and it's going to be more tolerable for you in the day of Sodom. So he's referencing right now, in the day of judgment, he's referencing the great white throne judgment. All right, so let me just back up just so we actually understand exactly what he's saying. The judgment, the day of judgment, and it's referred to that back in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, is when all the everyone that is dead is brought back to life, resurrected. So now they are embodied living people again. The righteous, what is going to happen to them? God is going to open up the what? What book? The book of life. So as a believer, your name is written in the book of life. And because of that, you're going to escape judgment, right? But what does it say about the unbelievers? He's going to open up, not the book of life for them, he's going to open up the book of their acts or their deeds or their works. And they're going to be judged according to that, right? So when it talks about the day of judgment, Jesus is referring to that day when the wicked have been resurrected and they are standing before his throne. And he then is going to have the books of their actions opened up. And they're going to be then judged based off of that. And then as we will learn a little bit later on, they're going to then go to the lake of fire or hell, right? So he's talking here about the judgment.
Is that what they mean where it says penalties and judgment right underneath there?
Yeah. What I have here in my conclusion. Yeah. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. Yeah. So keep in mind here, he's saying that the people that were in those cities that had great light, that don't respond to him, are going to be judged because of the light that they had and because they made a wrong decision, wrong choice. Their judgment, their punishment in hell is going to be greater than the punishment in hell for those who have lesser light. And the lesser light people are whom? The people of Sodom, Tyre, and Sidon. So what he's painting here is that when those books are opened and judgment is given, even though the people of Sodom were incredibly depraved and wicked, Tyre and Sidon incredibly depraved and wicked, their punishment, though severe, is going to be less of a punishment than the people in these cities. That is exactly what he's saying right here. Okay? Is everyone clear so far? All right. Okay. Now, here's the question. The question is, what does it mean to receive harsher punishment in hell? Like, most of the time, we just think that people are thrown in hell. Like, I mean, everyone's there. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter if, if all this get thrown into, boiling pot of oil or into the fire, it's all going to hurt the same, right? I mean, so what does it mean? Now, Jesus doesn't go on to explain it, so I can't tell you exactly what it means. What I will tell you is some of the primary theological conclusions that people have come to as possibilities. And I put that up there as potential possibilities because, frankly, we just don't know. What we do know is they will suffer greater. There will be a greater suffering of one group than another, right? And in fact, everyone that goes to hell, they will be judged according to their deeds. Those whose deeds have been wicked but light in comparison. Think of the 9-year-old Girl Scout who, yeah, she's a sinner, didn't accept Christ, but hasn't really done nothing, and versus the 99-year-old man who spent his life in depravity. They will have a different level of punishment. Does that all make sense? Because God is just and the punishment fits the crime. That's one thing we know with God is he judges justly according to the crime. Okay, so what might that look like then in hell? Well, like I said, I can't tell you for sure, but some of the possibilities are this. It could be that there are different levels of pain or severity of pain. Just like each one of us can experience pains in our body. Sometimes we got a dull throbbing pain. Sometimes it's an absolute pain that just drops you. I mean, you cannot do anything but think of the pain, right? There's different levels. So perhaps, maybe that's what it is. We don't know. So it could be different levels of pain or severity. It could be different types of pain and suffering. We have, again, not every type of pain that you experience is the same. So maybe some get one type of punishment and some get another. I don't necessarily know about that one, but it's certainly a possibility. We just don't know. The third one is the different lengths of time spent in hell. Now, again, these three views are held by conservative, evangelical, Bible-believing, inerrantists, the people that believe that the Bible is the Word of God and is without error. So all three of these are held by conservative, evangelical scholars and theologians. This last one, there's three views of hell that are held by conservative evangelicals. And we are going to get to this. So just in case, I'm not going to give you a lot tonight. We're going to actually take an excursus here in a little bit to actually talk about that. But the three views, one of them is called eternal conscious torment, which is that everyone that goes to hell is there for all of eternity. They are conscious of it, and they are being tormented and tortured by God for all of eternity. That's eternal conscious torment. The second one is what is called conditional immortality, which believes that people are thrown into hell and then they are destroyed and they die, as the Bible says. And when they die, they die. Just they stop living, right? They're no longer living, right? That's called conditional immortality. The third one is what's called universal reconciliation, which basically is the fact that hell is actually it's not a retributive justice, it's reformative justice, that what God does in hell is there is incredible suffering. But what happens is through that suffering, people eventually, what dies in hell is not the individual. What dies in hell is their depraved self. The old man is what ends up dying. And at the very end, they recognize who God is, they recognize his love, and that they accept him there. Now, again, there's biblical reasons for all three of these. And when we get into the doctrine of hell, so in case you're curious, hold on to it, because all three of them have biblical data used to support it. And they're all held by conservative, evangelical, inerrantist, Bible-believing, just like you and I. So all I'm saying here is that it's universal reconciliation, okay? And it just means that everyone eventually will be reconciled unto Christ. Some are going to have to go through hell. I mean, literally, they're going to have to go through hell before they're saved, right? And so the purpose of being saved in this life is so you don't have to go through hell, because it's going to be hell. And some people, like Hitler, probably going to have to spend a lot of time in hell to work through that, to give up their depravity and to recognize God and everything else. So anyway, I won't go into that. It's not a works based, by the way. Salvation is based only on the death of Christ. But the process that's used to bring that person to express faith in Christ so that his blood can be applied to them is the process of hell. And again, I'm just giving you a brief picture of that view. So on those last two, this only applies to the last two, because if you're eternal conscious torment, you believe that hell is for eternity, so it never ends. So the third one wouldn't apply if you held to that view. However, if you are a conditional immortality proponent, or of universal reconciliation, one of the possibilities of that, in fact, very distinct possibility, is in fact that hell is going to last for a certain time for different people. So maybe Hitler spends a longer period of time than you do, and then, either you die or you're reconciled. So we don't know what it means. We can only hypothesize about what that means, but what is very clear is that people are going to be punished differently in hell. It is not a one-size-fits-all. God is going to judge you according to your works, and your punishment will be according to your works. So we don't have to worry about God's justice in hell, regardless of which of the three views you take, because we know that right here, he is going to be just. All right? This is essentially what you want to pull out of this. God is going to be just, and he's going to pay people back for the works that they have done. In this case, going back to our context here, these cities, he's going to say, are more liable to judgment. Okay? It's kind of like what he says about Judas. Be better if you'd never been born, because when we talk about people that are going to receive punishment, you don't want to be Judas, right? So there, again, it's an indication of like his state is going to be worse than someone else's state when they go there. All right. Now, I'm just going to give us just a very quick glimpse into this. Now, into this idea of hell, because here's the thing. You may not realize it, but the Old Testament doesn't use the word hell at all. Now, it does talk about the fate of the wicked. So to say the Old Testament doesn't say anything about what happens to the wicked is not true. In fact, we learn more about what happens to the wicked when they are judged in the Old Testament than almost we do in the New Testament. However, it doesn't use the word hell. Hell as the name of the place where the people that are damned go. correct? So we hear the term hell for the first time in the New Testament. What may surprise you, though, is that most of the times, and there's only, I think, like 11 times that the word is used, and sometimes it's used by two gospel writers for the same event, so it doesn't even count as another one. Almost all of them are times that are mentioned by Christ. Paul doesn't even hardly talk about it. Like, hell is not even part of Paul's theology. What is part of Paul's theology is that certainly the wicked will be judged, but he does not go into any kind of a doctrinal treatise on the doctrine of hell like he does with salvation and many, many other things. So Paul's almost entirely quiet on that. You get Jude, right? You get James, and then you get a couple references in John. So the vast majority of all the references we have in hell are through the lips of Christ. Okay, so because of that, in a few weeks, we're actually going to take, like I said, a little excursus so that we can actually understand what it is, because he's the one that's actually talking about this, and he's the one that's defining this more than anybody else. So we need to understand what it is that he's saying happens to people to make sure that we understand, have it from a right theological perspective. All right. So I'm just going to leave this here for now until we get into much deeper stuff. But because he has mentioned this idea of the judgment and that they suffer, in this case in hell, let me just tell you what we know so far. We know that hell is a place to be avoided at all costs, and we know that from Matthew chapter 5:22. And again, this is two of the instances that Christ uses it, where he says, "Hey, look, you'll be liable if you say you'll be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire." Okay, well, he's talking about hell right there. So that's the first time it's mentioned. Then you've got the fact that it's better to have your whole body, for one member of your body to be thrown away than your whole body to be thrown in hell. So that's kind of the second one. And then we've got, it's better to lose one of your members than your whole body going to hell. So here we have these instances here. So we know hell's a place to be avoided at all cost. Hell is also is represented by fire. It's this symbol of destruction and death. So we know John the Baptist, he talked about the fact that the wicked will perish by like chaff that is burnt up. So when you see the reference to hell and the reference to the destruction of the wicked, you see that as represented, not exclusively, but almost exclusively in terms of fire, of being burnt up, katakaio, being completely burned up, being wholly and fully consumed by fire. And then the other thing that we learn here, so it's kind of the third thing that we're learning so far as we get into this, is that there will be different levels of punishment. So I'm going to kind of leave that there, but that's kind of what we've gotten so far from the gospel accounts regarding this particular doctrine. All right. And I'll save some time later on if people have some questions. Okay, so he's just got done cursing these cities, and now we get to the next part of his discussion, which is this explanation for their unbelief. And he's going to now say this, and this is basically, it looks like it's a prayer, but it doesn't say, normally when Jesus prays, it says that Jesus prayed and talked to the Father. It says here that Jesus declared. So this is not meant to be sort of an aside. This is meant for Jesus to declare to the group. He's just condemned these cities, and now he's going to make a declaration about their unbelief, right? And so it says, at that time, Jesus declared, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you've hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So now he's still talking to the crowd. He's condemned these cities, and now he's saying that he thanks God. Now, what does he thank God for? It seems really weird. Now, just think about this for a moment. He says, "I thank God," or I thank you, Father, that you have done what? Hidden. Hey, thank you, God, that you have hidden these things from the wise. Seems like a very interesting statement, right? Because when we think about Jesus as the ultimate communicator, at least that's the way that's the way we like to picture him. Why would someone who wants to communicate truth be thanking God that in fact God is hiding the truth from these quote wise people, and yet he is helping the childlike, the innocent, the unwise, the foolish to understand? In what way would God want that to be the result? Do you see my question here? Seems kind of odd to say, God, I thank you that you're blinding them. I thank you that they don't see the truth. Wait, hold on a second here. I thought you just said, look at all the miracles I've done and I'm the Messiah. And now you're thanking God that in fact, they're not going to recognize those works as being messianic and they're going to reject you. How in the world is that a thank you note to God? For such was your gracious will. Okay, so this is where we've got to start thinking here. That, yeah, I know. Uh-oh. Okay. Remember what is happening at this point. He has presented himself as the Messiah. He's predicted that he's going to be rejected by them. He's condemned them for their unbelief. And now he's thanking God that their unbelief is going to result in, like you said, it's going to result in God's gracious will being carried out. Now, we know the plot, so we know the story. The people hearing Christ didn't have a clue what he was talking about, I guarantee you. But what is God's gracious will in the blinding of the wise to his messianic claims? What is accomplished?
They're not lukewarm.
They're not lukewarm, so certainly they deserve their judgment, like they're going to fall on one side. But what happens because they reject his messiahship? They kill him. They kill him, and because they kill him, he is able to then pay the price, the penalty for the sins of the world. So while there is a short-term scratching of the head, like how does this rejection work, God, to your glory? Don't you want everyone to know? Like, how in the world can this actually be a good thing? And yet we know the end of the book. We've read the end of the book, and we realize that their rejection of him results in his death and substitutionary atonement for the entire world. So Jesus is looking outward, looking forward, and saying, I thank you because even though this is going to be painful in the short term, and I don't mean just painful like because of his death, painful because of what he's going to have to go through to get there, the emotional pain and the rejection, everything else, that this in fact is going to help God accomplish his will, right? So let's kind of keep that in mind about what is going on here, all right? All right. So again, what we have here is we have this idea. Now, when Jesus uses this idea of his glorious will, Paul picks up on this in Ephesians 1:5, right? And he says that he, that's God, predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will. So God has a purpose and a will that many times is unknown to us at the time, and even sometimes later, what it is, but we know that he's working everything out for the glory and purpose of his will. So this rejection that is going to happen next week that we're going to see is not unknown. It's not unforeseen. Jesus is already predicting it before it even happens. And he's already declaring that this rejection is going to result in God's purpose and will being accomplished, right? Jesus is in full control, 100% full control of everything that is going on. All right. So like we already said, what is God's will in this specific situation? His will is to hide who he is from the wise, from those, and in this case, the wise is a pejorative term for the religious leaders. They think they're wise. They think they know what God wants. They think they know how to get to God. They think they know all of these things that are not true. And Jesus saying, it's a good thing that you're hiding who I am from them, because eventually they're going to reject me and it's going to lead to my death. But God, I'm thankful that you have not hidden it from those who are like little babies, children, because it can't be a total rejection of Christ. It only can be a partial rejection. There are still need to be people that respond. And in fact, Jesus says, I'm thankful that in fact, those who are not high and lofty, those who don't think they're wise, the ones that have actually looked and they look at what I've done and said, he's got to be the Messiah. I don't care what these Pharisees say, he's got to be the Messiah. Those who are going to accept Christ for what he has done and his messianic claims are going to, in fact, be shown the light, and they will, in fact, accept Jesus as the Messiah. All right? Okay. Now, it's interesting because Jesus makes a claim about why, in fact, he knows that this coming rejection is of God. So how do we know? Like someone might say, if you're thinking there, if you're sitting there and you're in the crowd, you might be like, geez, how do you know this is going to happen? Like, where do you get off telling us that this is actually what's going to happen? Well, Jesus backs up the claim that God has blinded the wise and that he has given truth to the children, because he says, and we'll go back here and just read this. He says here, all things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father. And get this, this is the key point here. No one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. So the reason why Jesus knows what is going to happen next, the reason why he knows that he's done all these miracles, and yet despite all these miracles, he's going to be rejected, and all these cities are going to reject him. The reason why he is confident in saying all of this is because the Father has done what? What has the Father done? The Father has revealed everything to him. Okay? This is why Jesus says, look, no one knows the Father except the Son, and no one knows the Son except the Father. And that's because there is this Trinitarian union between God the Father and God the Son. And so Jesus is now claiming that everything I'm saying is true because I actually know what the Father's will is. Jesus, how do you know what the Father's will is? What gives you the right to say what, that this, whatever's going on is pleasing to God? Because the Father and I, he's going to say later on, the Father and I are what? One. Here he says the reason why he knows it is because he knows the Father and the Father knows the Son and the Father's revealed it to him. Okay? So this is what's going on here. He's backing up his claim now about what is going to happen. Isn't just me just spouting something. It's because, in fact, God has revealed himself. And here's the interesting thing is that, Revelation is really not the revelation of John. We think of it, as the revelation of John the Apostle, but it's not. It's the revelation of whom? What's the actual title of the book? The revelation of
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ. That's the name of, Revelation is the revelation of Jesus Christ, not the revelation of John, right? Because Jesus is the final and full revelation to the world of the Father. And so we start seeing Jesus making these claims as early as this point right here, that he knows the Father knows him. He'll say things like, the Father and I are one. He's already said, I don't do anything except for what the Father wants me to do. Like he's building this case here that when you see me, now catch this here. This is what he's saying, if you don't catch anything else. When you see Jesus, you see whom?
The Father.
The Father. You want to know what God looks like? Just look to Jesus. He is the full and final revelation of who the Father is. So he's making a very, very bold claim. Remember, we talked about earlier that the Jews would never say, like, my Father. They would talk about God the Father as the Father of the nation, but they would never talk about God as my Father in a personal way. That is blasphemy. So Jesus right here, by saying this, is actually making a very unique, explosive claim that the Father and he are unique. He is unique because he actually knows exactly what the Father wants. The Father knows him in a very unique, personal way, not in a corporate way. Does that all make sense? So if you were a Jew hearing him say this right now, you would have been out of your mind. Like the Pharisees right now are ready to, in fact, what we'll see next week, they're already done with him. They've already been plotting his death. And this thing right here, like you talk about the straw that broke the camel's back, here's the straw. Well, actually, the straw will be next week, but this is one big piece of straw. This is a hay bale that's been thrown on their backs that they are ready to kick off. All right. Now, let me just go through the last part, and then we'll be done really with this section, and that'll really prepare us for next week. All right. So this is the invitation to belief and discipleship. So this is our fourth section that we have here. Now, again, this is the same situation. Jesus hadn't stopped talking at all. It's the same conversation, okay? Now, Jesus is saying, again, he's still talking to the crowds. He's still talking about, he's still talking about, God blinding the wise and giving basically the sight or revelation to those who are not wise. And he's going to end his talk, his discussion, his exhortation to the crowd by saying this: "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, I want you to notice the first thing is right here. What does he say?
Come to me.
Come. This is an invitation. This is a command. Come. If you're this type of person, come. I'm telling you to come right now. In other words, this is the invitation. Like we're used to being in church and hearing the invitation at the very end. Hey, if you haven't accepted Christ, whatever. Like this is an invitation. He's now talked to the crowd and he's saying, come. If you are one of these people, come. So he's proclaimed himself to be the Messiah to John's disciples. He's discussed to the crowd. He's condemned already these cities that he knows will reject him. He's already said that some of you I know aren't going to believe in me because you think you're wise and God's going to blind you, right? But then he's going to say, come. To those of you that have faith like little children, that can actually see my works for what they are. You've seen it. Come. The invitation. Now, going back to what we talked about earlier when Christ started to assemble his group of disciples, the typical way that this would happen is that if you want to become a disciple of a rabbi, you would stay close to the rabbi, not close enough that you would annoy him, but not far enough away that he wouldn't recognize that you had an interest, and you would follow him around. It could be days, it could be weeks. And eventually, he would turn to that individual and he would say one of two things. Either come to my home, right, as an invitation of discipleship, or go. I'm not interested. All right. So what Christ does here as the rabbi, he has basically said, it's all been presented to you. Now I'm making an offer to each of you to come and be what? My disciple. Because that's what a rabbi did. When you became a pupil of a rabbi, you were becoming his disciple. Disciple just means learner. It's one who learns from somebody. So Jesus is making the offer. Come to me, let me be your rabbi, and learn from me. If you don't, and you reject my offer for you to come and learn and to be underneath me, to be my disciple, then there's going to be judgment. Right? We're all still good? Okay. All right. Now, what he says here is he says there's like two groups of people that he's calling here. Notice he's not calling the wise. He's they've already made their choice. Doesn't mean that they can't maybe, later on repent or whatever else. But right now he's saying, I'm making a call to those of you who will accept the works that I have done and who are what? Weary and who are burdened, right? Now, weary is this word that means tired, exhausted. Now, we tend to think of this in physical terms. Now, Christ is not referring to those who are physically tired here, but you all know what it's like to be weary, where you've worked you've worked your tail off, and literally, if you laid down in bed, you're not getting up. Like, I remember traveling over to Africa a few years ago, and it was so long, and I was so jet lagged that okay, I'm just going to get into my hotel room. I'm going to, put everything away, and then I'm going to go out and grab something to eat because I hadn't eaten anything except for like really bad plane food. And I sat down on the edge of my bed, and I woke up like 6-7 hours later, and it's pitch black. Like, I didn't even know. I literally sat down. I don't even remember even laying down on the bed, and I was out. Like, there's a weariness, right? Some of us have been weary from life circumstances where you feel like, man, I cannot go on any further. Like, life is kicking me. And I'm just weary, tired. Burdened is that idea of being loaded down. You think of like a pack mule, or you think about someone who's just carrying so much weight and, you're just dragging. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't do this as much anymore, but I used to like when my wife would go to the store, she'd load up the back of her van with all the bags, right? I like to be the guy that was like, I want to carry every single piece of that in one shot. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
So I'm getting like bags, and the bags are all lined up on my arms on this side, and I've got 4 or 5 bags in my hand. Same thing over here. And I'm literally like walking in because I don't know really why. It's probably because I was too lazy to make more than one trip, but you know what I'm talking about? Like, you are burdened and you cannot wait just to put that thing down. Like, I can't wait to get to the kitchen counter. There's this idea of those who are burdened. So Jesus says, hey, look, if you're weary and you're burdened, I'm going to give you what? Rest. Now, if you're weary and burdened, when someone says, you want to take a rest? Like, what does that do when you hear an offer to take a rest when life's just burdening you and wearing you? Right?
It's a load off your shoulders.
Load off. Like, there is a sense of like joy and relief when there's true rest being offered to you when you're in this situation. All right, now, what is Jesus referencing this here? I want to keep this, I want to make sure that we are exegeting the passage properly, because many times when you hear this in church, it's not going to come with the right context or flavor, right? So specifically, what Jesus is talking about here is in reference to really one of two things, and I think probably both are in view. This section is about two things. One of them is what? Who he is as the Messiah. The second one is in contrast to those who think that they are wise and are going to reject him. And those are going to be the Pharisees, the religious leaders. Okay? So when Jesus is offering rest to those who come to him and be disciples, he's offering them something that is different than what they are currently experiencing. Okay? I'm going to get into that in just a moment here. He's not offering them physical rest. He's not offering them a vacation or, a margarita on the beach, or, you know what I'm talking about? Like, this is not the idea. This is not about that. This is not about the Sabbath. This is about Jesus saying, if you become my disciple, something is going to change. You're going to experience rest. We're going to get into what that is here in just a moment. But I just want you to understand that he's offering that. Those who are in that state, I will give you rest. And we'll see what that might look like here. Now, one of the main things that we see going on here is that this weariness from these burdens, and he's going to reference this throughout the gospel accounts, is specifically a reference to the Pharisaic laws. So we know at least one of the things that he is saying is, if you come to me, I will give you rest. And what's he going to give them rest from? Rest from all of these religious man-made laws that made it so that you couldn't heal on the Sabbath, you couldn't rescue anything on the Sabbath unless it was about ready to die, you couldn't cook on the Sabbath, you couldn't walk on this. I mean, all the stuff that made it basically intolerable. Their idea of rest was the opposite of rest. It was imprisonment. It was burdensome. You couldn't fulfill their rules. You were always messing up. Like, it's the opposite of rest. It's the always being in trouble, never being able to get it right life. All of these man-made rules, and they would burden them. They would tie it to the cumin, the lowest the lowest of the things, and they would get on people who didn't it was so burdensome. And Jesus is going to say, look, that's not right. And we already know that because in the Sermon on the Mount, he was comparing what? The false interpretation of the Mosaic law by the Pharisees as compared to God's true interpretation of the Mosaic law. Remember that? That's what the Sermon on the Mount was all about. So we've already seen this contrast between this burdensome weight and where Jesus says, no, that isn't right. Now he's offering them to remove that yoke and to put on his yoke. Now we're going to get into that here in just a moment. Because what he says, he uses a term that for them would have meant something. Now to us, when we think of yoke, what do we think of?
An egg.
Okay, egg. Okay, egg. What else do we think of yoke in relation to burdens? Burden and
An ox.
An ox. Yeah, we think with this. So this is what you're gonna hear a lot of this in church. Like, here's what Jesus is saying. Like, you know what? They've got this big yoke on them and whatever else. That is not what they would have thought of as the yoke. This is a common rabbinic term. They would have thought of it differently, right? So yoke in that that time meant that you were going to go to school. And what it meant is if I'm your rabbi and I say, you want to be my disciple, my pupil, you need to take on my yoke, which means you need to come to my school and you need to learn from me and you need to do the things I'm going to tell you to do. So to be yoked to a rabbi meant to be that rabbi's disciple, to learn from him and to do what he wants. So what he's saying here is that, look, you already been yoked to really bad teachers. Does that make sense? These religious leaders who have burdened you down your entire life, you've been yoked to them because that's sort of how you were raised. And guess what? When you're yoked to them, their burden is what?
Heavy.
Heavy.
Heavy, man.
Burdensome. Nothing but rules. Man-made stuff. That's what you're going to get. Now what he's going to say is, hey, look, though, if you want to be yoked to me, if you take on my yoke, if you come and learn from me, it's light. Now, it doesn't, now notice he doesn't say, come to me because there's no burden at all. Like, here's these guys that are really burdensome. And if you come to me, everything's free game. Like, Jesus is not Mr. Chaos. He's not Mr. Free-for-all. He's not just do whatever you want. There is still a yoke. There's still teaching. There are still things that the teacher expects you to do. But in comparison to the other teachers, the Pharisaic leaders, who are burdening you down where you cannot literally breathe, Jesus says, my rules are there to give you life. They're there to lead you down the right path. They're there to help you to be the type of person that you need to be for yourself, for God, and for others. Right? Remember, Sermon on the Mount, that's what it was. Here's the righteousness of God's law. Righteousness that exalts God and righteousness that allows you to interact properly and to elevate those around you, right? It's the upward and the outward. And that's what he's saying. Come to me and I'm going to give you a yoke that's going to be light. It's going to be easy. Okay? All right. Now he adds something in here. He says that why should they trust him? Like, I've just made you an offer. Think about this like a school. Like if a school, or maybe a job, maybe you're a job or something like that, and they're pitching for you. You're like, you're the person that everyone wants to go for. And they're pitching it to you and they're saying, hey, come over here, take this job, or come to this school, and they're pitching it. Well, Jesus is saying, hey, look, I'm going to pitch to you why you should come and take on my yoke. And what is his pitch? What does he say? Come to me. Why? Because what? Well, that is one of the things, but he says what? And you notice when he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, that's because yoke is not meant to be an animal thing. It's meant to be what we just talked about, to learn. He says here, why? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. So before he says that it's easy and light, he says, why? For, this is the reason. I am what? Gentle and lowly in heart. So think about what he's saying here. I've done all these miracles and everything else. But when I ask you to come and be my disciple, when I ask you to come and to accept who I am as the Messiah, and then be my disciple and learn from me, you can trust me because I'm not in it for me. Like the Pharisees were all in it for themselves. Remember when Jesus says that they love the what? They love the attention by others. They love the what? The front seat, the best places at the dinner table. They're always looking for me, me, me. How do they elevate? How do I become the person that gets put at the very front part of the table, the place of honor? So when you come to them, they're doing it for their own glory. Look how many pupils I have. Look at so-and-so. In other words, their yoke is for their own gratification, for their own ego. And Jesus says, I'm not like that. I'm coming to you humbly and meekly because what I offer to you is life. My yoke is life. It's not death. Right? That is exactly what he's saying. And that's what he says to us. Come to me because my motivation, ultimately he gets the glory, but he gets the glory because his motivation is that you and I receive life, that you and I walk in righteousness, right? And so we can trust him because his interest is in us, not in himself, right? Okay. Now, again, it does say that they're to learn from it. So this is something that's kind of a little bit important thing that we want to pick up here, that we can sit. How many of you, my kids are in school right now, and I'm helping my youngest son out with his math. And I'm telling you right now, like this is 7th grade math. And there are a few times where he's like, Daddy, help me out. And I'm doing this with my phone. I'm turning around and I'm like getting the YouTube out there. And I'm like, what is the formula for the area of a triangle? It's a half base times side. I don't know. I'm not a carpenter. I don't use that kind of stuff anymore. So there's a you probably do because you are a carpenter. Oh, you don't? It's half times base times height. Area equals half times base times height. Anyway, I'm doing this. You know why? Because I heard I got A's in geometry and trigonometry, but I don't put it into practice. I don't build stuff. I mean, I don't ever have to figure out what the area of a triangle is. And so I learned, but I don't do. So there's a difference between learning and doing. And discipleship, Jesus is going to say, is come to me and learn. Do. Put it into practice. That's what a disciple actually does. Okay. And in fact, that's what disciple is. Disciple just means learner, one who learns, right? To learn. And that's actually where we get this idea of discipline, right? The English word discipline comes from disciple as its root word. Now we think of discipline as a punitive word, to be disciplined most of the time. But in fact, when you think about it from a sports perspective, we talk about it as being disciplined. The person's disciplined in their workout or whatever else. So what it means is a disciplined person is one who has learned truth about some aspect of life and then does it. And they put their life in order to achieve the knowledge that they know is true. That's what it means to be a disciple of Christ. What have we learned? And when we discipline ourselves, we then put into action what we know is truth. That's what a disciple is. All right. Okay. Okay, so let me kind of end this here with oops, sorry about that. Hit the wrong button. Let me just end this here with this concept, because I want to talk a little bit more about rest. What does rest actually mean? Because Jesus promises that he'll give you rest. You will find rest for your souls. What does he actually mean by rest? Okay. Now, we know that there are kind of three primary meanings of this word, right? There's some nuances too, but let me give you kind of the three primary meanings here. The first one is to cause or permit one to cease from any labor or movement so as to recover strength. Okay, we know that. That's talking about physical, although we could probably put mental in there as well, like taking a break, like, man, my brain is fried. So we understand rest in that way. I've worked out in the yard, I need to take a rest so that you can recover. And when you rest, your body and your mind recover. That's one way in which that term is used, and it's used that way in the Bible as well. That's a perfectly fine definition. The second one is a letting loose, a relaxation, or an easing of something. So we don't necessarily mean, in this case, relaxation like relax on a beach, but it means to make something less burdensome than it was before. So in the case here of Christ, he's talking about you're under these burdens, these legal requirements, these laws that have been put on you, and I'm going to give you rest by what? Relaxing those, unburdening them. I'm going to pull apart the things that you don't need, and that burden now becomes the yoke that I'm going to give you is less. Okay, so we know the first one up here is not what he's talking about, because the situation has nothing to do with physical rest. He's not offering people a vacation to go sit on the beach. He's not offering them go to my house and I got a room in the back and you can go and take a nap. So we know that even though this is a way that rest is defined, and sometimes it is what's being talked about in the scriptures, he is not referring to that. So it's two or three, and I think it's actually possibly both. It's a little hard to tell from the context if it's one or the other. I think it's both. So I think the first one absolutely applies, because he's talked about his yoke being easy versus being heavy. He's talked about learning this idea of disciple, and of course they would have immediately thought of the rabbis and the Pharisees. So I think this is absolutely, this one here is part of what he's talking about. Come to me, and the things that I'm going to then require of you are going to be easy. Easier, I guess I should say, than what you're currently under, right? Okay. The third one, and this is one that I want to expound on just a little bit more, and I'm going to end with this tonight, is that the term also has this idea, and I'm going to say this here, and I'm going to kind of explain it if it doesn't make any sense, that rest is a condition that exists because the environment, that should say is conducive, I apologize, because the environment is conducive or optimized to achieve a desired result or outcome. Okay? What I'm saying there by that definition is this, is that rest is when your environment is in such a state that you can achieve the desired results and purposes that has been set up. So let me describe to you what that might look like in some situations to make it more clear, and then I'll go back to what I think the second thing that Jesus is saying here. So rest in your marriage would look something like this, that you and your wife are creating an environment, are taking actions towards each other that are leading towards you become closer, more loving, more caring, more open, more support, whatever it is. Like, define what marriage would look like in an optimized form. And when your marriage is at rest, it is because both of you are taking actions that are creating a conducive environment for that to occur. Does that all make sense? Okay. Same thing with your family. How do you create rest in your family? You remove distractions that are going to pull your family apart, You remove things that are going to hurt your family, that are then going to cause friction in your family. As a father, you're going to find the best way to interact with your children, to raise them up in a way that there is going to lead them to righteousness, and it's also not going to push them away. Like you're trying to achieve something within a family unit. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. I'm saying that's what rest looks like. When you have a family that's at rest, it's working. It's working towards that goal. It's creating a conducive environment, right? So let me give you some examples of other things from a biblical perspective, and then I'm going to end off with just this one here that I think is what is happening. When you go back to Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and also verse 3, it says that on the seventh day, God did what? Rested. Now, most of us have been taught and think that what that means is God spent 6 days doing all this stuff, and then on the seventh day, he kind of steps back and he's like, just looking at it. Man, that's good. That's good. That is good. Like this is what he does on the seventh day. But in fact, that is not the idea of rest found in Genesis or other parts of the Old Testament. The idea of rest in this, in fact, this is a much more, I don't have time to go into this time. I'm just going to make a statement here, and you're going to have to either trust me on it or you're going to have to call me on it later on. The 6-day account in Genesis, I don't believe is primarily an account of the material creation of the universe and the things in the universe. It does include some of that. But when you look at some of the days, guess what? Just take a casual reading. There are some days when nothing's created. It's not a day of creation. And in fact, the creation accounts in ancient world were not about the creation of material. So the material stuff is already there. The creation accounts, including what I believe Genesis is actually more focused on, is not on the material creation. It's not denying that God created it. What the Genesis account is about is a description of how God is going to take the created world and take chaos out and turn it into order, so that he creates an environment that is conducive for whom? Mankind. So he's going to separate the waters from the land. Why? Because so people, they're not fish, so they have a place to, all of these things that he does, and he calls it good because he has created that. So on the seventh day, it's not like God is not doing anything. God is actually doing something. In fact, on the seventh day, God is interacting now with his creation. He's not sitting back in his lazy chair, just sitting back. He's actually now saying the seventh day is a day of rest. Now, that doesn't mean he's not doing anything. It means he's doing something. He has taken 6 days to take creation and order it so that we have a conducive environment for mankind, right, as one thing. We see that with the tabernacle and the temple, where it says, where there was 7 days, there's 6 days of consecration. The seventh day, God's presence came down in the tabernacle and the temple and did that. The reason is because the 6 days were used to consecrate the temple and the tabernacle. Getting all the tools and utensils and things like that. There's lots of work being done for 6 days to create order out of chaos, right? To create an environment that was what? Suitable for God's presence, his earthly presence in the Holy of Holies. So that on the seventh day, God's presence came there, and there was smoke and everything else. And it said the priest couldn't even stand before God. So God isn't not doing anything. What it's saying is that on the seventh day, God's doing something. In other words, the environment, the 6 days have created an environment that's now conducive for him to accomplish his goals in life. All right. So I think that this third one actually is a very viable option for that. Now, here's how I think this relates to our current topic. All right. If the people, remember, this verse must be taken in its context. Jesus has just offered himself again to the people, right? I'm your Messiah, come to me, right? Very clear, okay? Now, if he had been accepted by them as the Messiah, what would have happened? He had offered them the kingdom as their Messiah. If they had accepted him, what would he have done? He already says, the kingdom of God is at hand. He is making a legitimate offer of the kingdom being established in their day. If he says, remember back last week, he was talking about John the Baptist, if you would accept me and what I'm saying, John would have been Elijah. So he's making a legitimate offer to the people that if you accept me as your Messiah, the kingdom of God is at hand. It's right here. If you do that, then what am I going to do? I'm going to do what?
Give you rest.
Well, okay, but what does rest mean in this case? If you accept me as the Messiah, what am I going to do?
Allow you to get into heaven.
Not allow you to get up in heaven. No, what am I going to do? Yes, bring the optimized kingdom of God to earth. And what that means, what that would have meant to the Jews, is the establishment of the Messianic kingdom. What the entire Old Testament had said the Messiah was going to do, he would do if they had accepted him as the Messiah. So his point here is this. If you accept me, and if you come to me, if you proclaim me as the Messiah, I will establish the kingdom in your day. We're going to see next week that he rescinds that offer to that generation of Jews. He's going to remove that offer next week and never offer it to them again. He will offer it again to a future generation of Jews. But if they had accepted him right now, he would have inaugurated the Messianic kingdom. And then all the things we talked about last week that were true of the kingdom, peace on earth, no war, the Messiah ruling from Jerusalem, all the nations coming to Jerusalem to worship, the world being fertile with fruit and the animals being fertile and no one dying. You know, someone dies before 100 years old, you know, they consider as dying as a baby. Like all this stuff, if you wrap it up, that would have happened. And so if you want to get rest, the kingdom is where you get rest. Like that is the environment. Like right now, it's war, it's pain, it's suffering. If you accept me, I will inaugurate the kingdom. And when the kingdom gets inaugurated, guess what? You experience rest, right? So I think that what is going on here is two things because of what he has just done. He's offered himself as the Messiah. He's asked them to choose him, to accept him. So this is the Messiah part. If you accept me, I'll give you rest. And that rest would look like the inaugurated Messianic kingdom. Second of all, if you come to me, all this other foolishness here that you're dealing with all these laws from these other yokers, local yokers, you don't have to do. You can follow me. Those are the two elements there of that rest that I think Jesus is talking about. Now, I'm going to end this with this. What's the application to us? What's the application to us? Because we're not under Pharisaic law. So this first one up here, I mean, we're not in a Pharisaic law. And the kingdom was rejected by the Jews. So unless Jesus comes, you know, in the next little bit, you know, we're going to have to be resurrected from the dead to experience the Messianic kingdom. So both of these ideas of rest, at least from the context, don't directly apply. What's the application, though?
Again, what did you say the last part of that?
So if the rest he's talking about here is the inauguration of the Messianic kingdom, you and I are probably going to have to die and be resurrected again to be in the 1,000-year kingdom. That's the Messianic kingdom, right? That's where we're going to experience rest. So that aspect of rest, we will actually experience it. It's just going to be in the future for us. And most of us will die before it ever happens, right? So that's what I'm talking about here. So, and the other one is getting out from underneath the Pharisaic laws. So the direct application is to these individuals, but there is an application to us, right? And the application to us, if we go back here, is a couple things. First of all, this idea here of this rules-based religion. Like just because we don't have Pharisees around doesn't mean we don't have Pharisees. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? Man, you can live your life, and I've lived my life underneath that. And I've been one of the biggest judgmental people around, and I've been the one that's been keeping the tally of other people and not taking much of a tally of myself, right? Like there's a way that you can live your life that is not at all free, that is burdened down. There's zero joy. And Jesus says, look, I don't ask much of you. I do ask some things of you, but I don't ask much. Right? And these other man-made rules of you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't blah, 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 you can't play cards and you name it, there's a million things out there that Christians can't do that aren't even biblical. That's part of it here. Let the Messiah loosen you up and unburden you from the things that are not biblical Christianity, right? The second part of this is this idea of this rest in the kingdom. Now, that part is still future. We are not experiencing that. We experience nothing but strife. Bob, I think you and I are talking about this strife and politics. I mean, gosh, you just look out there right now, like this world is anything but restful. But one of the things that I know, and I come back to this all the time, no matter what happens in this life, there will be a day. There will be a day when I'm in the kingdom. I'm not talking about the eternal kingdom now. I'm just talking right here now about the Messianic kingdom that will be established. There will be a day when I'm sitting there in Jerusalem and I'm like, this is it. This is rest. I'm with the Messiah. He's ruling and reigning. Peace is established. We're worshiping in him. Pain, sorrow, suffering of life. He all of a sudden gives us rest. The rest we desire and strive for in this life, to take away everything that's going to cause us pain and suffering, whatever else, we fight against it all the time. We are going to experience that. It just happens to be future. But it keeps the current pain and suffering in this life, it puts it into context. This is 60, 70, 80, 90 years versus 1,000 years. And then after that, there's the eternal order. So basically, once you're in the Messianic kingdom, the rest of it's all gravy. Does that all make sense? There is a rest. It's coming. All right. Okay. Gosh, man, I went over time. I will, if anyone has any questions, I'm willing to take maybe a few questions and then we'll wrap it up. I apologize for preaching instead of teaching, but
Randall,
yes.
just real quick, I was reading Hebrews the other day, and in Hebrews 4, chapter 4, verses 1 through 13, the author talks about the promise of rest for God's people.
Yep.
And I think that really kind of, you hit it, you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. Now it's very interesting. I don't have time to go into it right now, but in Hebrews, he's talking to Jews who are contemplating going back to Judaism to escape persecution and death. And so the writer of Hebrews is specifically telling them, do not go back into that lifestyle. You've been freed by the Messiah. Don't do it. If you do, there's going to be punishment. And in fact, we know that very soon after the book of Hebrews was written, Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans, and there were millions of Jews slaughtered. And yet we know from history that all of the believers, the Jewish believers, recognized the sign that Jesus said in Matthew chapter 28, I believe, 24, to flee when you see this persecution coming. And they actually left the city and they were all saved. So there is some context there, even within Hebrews, to who he's writing to and what type of rest. You think you're going to get rest? You're actually going to get slaughtered. Stick with the Messiah. So anyway, I don't want to go into too much of that. That's just part of the Hebrews. But anyway, yes, Jeff.
So if that generation of Jews that Jesus was talking to specifically in this passage had accepted him, then in their lifetime, they would have experienced the Messianic kingdom.
The kingdom would have been established, yes.
Is that new earth? Or that's
No. The new earth. No, the new earth, yes. The new earth happens. So basically the new earth is going to happen. There's going to be the rapture and tribulation. So I'm not going to get into that kind of stuff. There's rapture and tribulation, 7 years. Then there's going to be the Messianic kingdom, which is 1,000 years. At that time, the the wicked will be resurrected. They will stand in judgment before Christ. They will then be thrown into hell. And then it says, after that time, heaven and earth will all be destroyed, and God will create a new heavens and a new earth. So that's the eternal order, but that happens at the end, after the Messianic kingdom and after the judgment of the wicked. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We will, next week is it. Next week is if you want to come to something, next week is where everything kind of hits the fan, so to speak, and it's going to get bad quick coming next week. So please come, and we will go from there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Randall. Bring a friend.
Bring a friend.
Bring a friend. See you,
Thank you. See you,
pal.
Mike.